Good morning. Today we're going to talk about Orwell and we're going to discuss a few of his essays by answering two questions.
The first question,
Is
what is the role of animals in the essay you read, and how well do you think Orwell incorporated them into the plot or imagery?
okay, so apart from creating distinct human characters in most of his essays, particularly in more story like texts such as Hanging, Marrakesh, and Shooting an Elephant, Orwell also uses the figure of animals to develop a thesis he plans in each work. Every animal that he creates has the purpose of exemplifying the general theme all texts have in common: man's observation of humanity. The author usually draws a parallel between a human and a man, and compares them in different ways.
For example, the text A Hanging has the animal presence of a dog. Orwell describes him as a very cheerful and oblivious to his surroundings. For example, a dog, come, goodness knows whence, had appeared in the yard. It came bounding among us with a loud volley of barks, and leapt round us wagging its whole body, wild with glee at finding so many human beings together. It was a large woolly dog, half Airedale, half pariah. For a moment it pranced around us, and then, before anyone could stop it, it made a dash for the prisoner, and jumping up tried to lick his face. In this case, not only does Orwell use the figure of a dog to break the tension in the scene, but he also creates a contrast between the animal and the narrator.
Through the description of the narrator, we get the sense that he is not excited about the execution and actually feels remorse. The dog represents the opposite of this dull attitude. He is full of life and jumps to lick everyone he can. He is happy because he does not know that someone will be killed. The contrast between the dog and narrator also illustrates how unconscious the narrator is to humanity. He only becomes aware of the life around him when he sees the dog's excitement, not because of the prisoner he has been escorting.
One can see that the innocence in the dog breaks once the prisoner is executed, the point where one can consider humanity to be broken, the point where the dog remains silent. Another animal worth mentioning is present in Shooting an Elephant, the elephant itself. For this specific text, the reader gets brilliant imagery of the elephant as it dies, as innocence is being destroyed. For example, he neither stirred nor fell, but every line of his body had altered. He looked suddenly stricken, shrunken, immensely old, as though the frightful impact of the bullet had paralyzed him without knocking him down. The imagery in this text is impacting and realistic. Due to this horrific precision, if the possible assumption that this essay blends the world of an animal with the plot exceptionally well. The role of this animal is to emphasize on the inability of the narrator to do something about the burden that is imposed on him. The narrator is aware of the injustice his position implicates, yet he does nothing about it. He unwillingly kills an elephant and feels horribly guilty after it, but at the same time, after acknowledging what he did, he tries to forgive himself by justifying his act, maybe to gain a little bit more of his soul and humanity back.
Lastly, Orwell also uses the figures of animals to compare them to human characters. In the essay Marrakesh, Orwell describes the situation he is in, where he is feeding a gazelle and a man comes and asks for food. In this case, precise imagery is also used to illustrate what is happening and the opinion on the narrator about it. An Arab navvy working on the path nearby lowered his heavy hoe and sidled towards us. He looked from the gazelle to the bread, and from the bread to the gazelle, with a sort of quiet amazement, as though he had never seen anything quite like this before. Finally, he said shyly in French, "I could eat some of that bread." In this case, Orwell purposely compares the navy with the gazelle, and what makes them both seem desperate for the bread. This may imply how the narrator truly views the people around him like animals.
Ultimately, Orwell uses the role of animals as an important tool to exemplify the points he is making, either comparing animals to humans or by attributing humanity to an animal. Now, for our second question, we will be answering What human issues arise from the subject of the work? And did you find any of them particularly well handled? Orwell's essays, for the most part, are defined by the various conflicts, personal or external, that arise in them. The texts characterize themselves for developing an external issue, such as an execution or the shooting of an animal, that seems to dominate throughout the majority of the work. Both the narrator's and the reader's attention is focused on what is happening on the outside of the text. In other words, the narrator's surroundings. Even though the essay seems to focus on the big picture, Orwell has the habit of presenting a more personal and physiological issue that involves the
Psychological.
Thank you, Sarah.
Psychological
Issues that involves the reflections or realizations of the main character himself. It is the thoughts and ideas of the narrator that give these a human perspective and make them all the more accessible for the reader to understand. These types of problems are usually linked to the external issue and can be considered as their consequence.
For example, in shooting an elephant, the main character must execute the animal, and even though his and public's attention is fixed on the actual killing, the most defined aspect is what the act made him feel. It is the situation of man versus the world. The narrator feels as if the pressure of the whole world is upon his shoulders, and he must do what they want to be at peace. During the death of the elephant, the narrator feels guilty and mad at what he has done. He turns on himself, but then also feels like a victim because of what his position forced him to do. It is the issue of being a witness of corrupt society in which he finds himself in. The same theme is also present in texts such as Marrakesh and politics in the English language.
Another human issue seen in Orwell's works is the inhumanity of man. This is probably the most powerful and recurring theme in the composition of essays. The best example of this loss of humanity is seen in the text of hanging. The main character must be part of an execution group at a prison, where a young man will be hanged. It is only before the actual hanging where the narrator jumps back into reality and realizes the horrible act that is to be made. The prisoner suddenly has a soul and dignity, making the narrator ask himself what the difference between the two of them is. Yet he does nothing. After the execution, he and the group start to laugh and make jokes, but the narrator lets us know he is traumatized and cannot forget the young man that has just been killed.
Thank you.